This is Dexter De La Paz, back to you with more unfinished conversations.
It is not enough. We stand in the dust at the end of centuries of useless sin and endless failure. The Legion was poisoned and we sacrificed an entire world to cleanse it. We failed. We are the sons of the only Primarch to hate his own Legion. There again, we failed. We swore vengeance on the Imperium, yet we run from every battle where we don't possess overwhelming force over a crippled enemy. We fail again and again and again. Have you ever fought a battle you'd struggle to win with no hope of running away? Have any of us? Have you ever, since the siege of Terra itself, drawn a weapon with the knowledge that you might die? Brother, Zarl began, backing away as Talos took another step closer despite Sirion and Mercutian's best efforts. I will not see my life hoard away without meaning. Do you hear me? Do you understand me, Prince of Cowards? I want vengeance against a galaxy that hates us. I want Imperial worlds to cower when we draw near. I want the weeping of this Empire's souls to reach all the way to Holy Terra, and the sound of suffering will choke the corpse god on his throne of gold.
Powerful stuff.
Okay, that's cool and all, fellas, but who the hell are we talking about?
We are talking about the 8th Legion, the Night Lords, the sons of the Primarch Konrad Kurtz.
The Night Haunter.
The Dark King, grimdark Batman himself.
Possibly the most emo kid of all the emo kid Primarchs.
And that's saying something with Corvus Corvax out there, huh?
Yeah, Corvus is definitely an emo boy. I think, the best word to describe Konrad Curze is broken. I think he would say that himself. And it kind of puts a different light to the Primarchs where, even, I can't even think of another, like Lorgar and his zealotness. He's still kind of put together in his own personality and emotions, where as Konrad Curze, he's not that political kind of figurehead, right? You're not going to put Konrad on a pedestal and have him address an entire planet that was just put into compliance. And I think that's a really, really neat aspect about his character.
Yeah, for being genetically engineered so that all of them had some ability to be ultra charismatic, at least in their own way. And, even mega autist Rogel Dorn is charismatic in his own way.
Yeah.
Look at his proclamation from the Bab Bastion. Heed it well, kill them all. Even he has charisma.
Yeah.
Even Angron has charisma. But where is Konrad's? Is he literally the only Primarch missing it?
So I think the novel that really does the best kind of treatment of Kurtz, in my opinion, is Prince of Crows, the novella which follows Jago Sevatarian, who is one of the great mysteries of the universe, right? Like, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? And the answer, depending on your perspective, and my answer would be he's a good bad guy, right?
Yeah.
He's a genuine anti-hero in a setting where there are too many characters that are called anti-heroes, but they aren't.
Right. They're just, either gritty heroes or they're just straight up villains, but on the correct side, right?
Right.
Yeah.
He is a genuine anti-hero, and he is extremely compelling for that reason. For people who don't know, Jago Sevatarian, also known as Sevatar, is the first captain of the Night Lords Legion. In traditional Horus Heresy lore, that would make him the boss of all their Terminators running around, though that's kind of old lore at this point, not quite how it works anymore.
Yeah, I think the Night Lords are kind of an enigma in the sense that, their Horus Heresy counterpart is so fleshed out. And, when it comes to the 40K setting, the best kind of snapshot we have of them as a Legion is the Night Lords trilogy by ADB. If you really want to dive into the culture of the Legion, their inner workings, their mindset, from Konrad's all the way to the Legion as a whole, you really have to look at the Horus Heresy, which I think gives a way better light to why they are the way they are in 40K.
Well, and before we get too much into that, I don't know if Mike was done with Sevatar the Mystery, but that's something that I think's integral to the Night Lords. I'd
Oh
like to
yeah, for
chat a
sure.
little bit more about that. Did you have more to add there, Mike?
So Sevatar is really interesting to me in that, like, he's the first one to say "death to the false emperor,"
Mm.
but he also, at great personal risk, in the later short story, "The Long Night," while he's being detained on the Blood Angels flagship, uh, he breaks into the astropathic choir to to effectively kill the first chair of the choir, because he had abused one of the astropaths who had been communicating with him and trying to save him, for lack of a better word. I don't really think that there's anything that kind of demonstrates his character better than that incident, other than maybe, at the end of Prince of Crows, when he says to the human crew, try not to get my ship killed, and basically try to stay alive, even though he knows that they're all going to certain death, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's this internal tension in the Night Lords, right, which you'll see them doing, terrible things for good reasons, or the reverse, right? They're taking the kind of evil path to doing the right thing, right?
Sure. Yeah. Now, Mike, the one big conspiracy that I'm not sure of, and I don't know if you can shed more light on, is I've heard a lot of people say that Jago might be connected to the Grey Knights in some way, might have came back to the Loyalist side of things. I haven't read anything that supports that theory, but then again, I haven't read a lot of the Night Lords novellas and series. Can you shine some light on that?
So I've read everything that I could find, right? That's like kind
Yeah.
of at immediately at hand, and it's all kind of smoke and mirrors, right? There's nothing that you can find that directly says, yeah, they took Sevatar's gene seed. Where people speculate it happened, is either the Grey Knights or the Chicharadons, but even then, again, nothing is really fleshed out. It's all kind of, you get a piece here, a piece there, and you can kind of weave the story together, but there's enough there that's deniable where nobody can really put it together.
Yeah.
So the whole thing with that is simply the fact that Sevatar seems to have at least some sort of psycho capability.
Hmm.
Now, whether that's actual psycho capability or it's just the visions that Curze and Sanguinius, for example, have, which somehow seem to be distinct from psycho activity.
So
Yeah.
Talos Valcorin has that foresight, that farsight, whatever you want to call it, warp
Mm-hmm.
sight. Talos being the protagonist of the Night Lords trilogy,
Yep.
and throughout that novel, or that series of novels, they're all speculating that effectively that gift, that Primarch's gift, is also killing him. Right?
So the thought is that foresight is a sign of psycho activity, and given that Sevatar never swore allegiance to chaos,
Right.
just renegade status, after seeing the disaster of the Horus Heresy Civil War, he eventually repented and became one of the founding Grey Knight Grand Masters.
Right.
Now, the problem with that theory is that the timeline's all wrong. The
Hmm.
Siege of Terra novels have made it pretty clear that by the time Sevatar should already be on Titan training the Grey Knights, he's nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
The Psychers that were taken, the librarians that were taken to found the Grey Knights, were already on Titan because Malkador had already tossed the entire moon of Titan into the warp by that point. So it was a good theory for a while, but given the way that the lore has developed through Black Library writing, I think we're at the point where we can write off Sevatar as a Grey Knight
Yeah.
and also conclude that this foresight is also somehow not a psyker trait at all.
More so like a genetic mutation type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like Talos talks about it. I think it was Talos in the trilogy where they know like before the siege he went missing, but after that, like nobody knows, right? Like some of the Night Lords think he's dead. Some of them are like, he went to live on, but I don't know if we'll ever get an answer to that mystery, but it is something that's really interesting.
For sure.
Now, you had mentioned the Carcharodons, the
Yeah.
space sharks. I'm at the point now where I'm actually partial to that theory.
Yeah.
I have not yet read those books myself. I don't get hot and bothered for marine stories. I have a hard time reading them. But the concept of that chapter is neat, right?
Right.
Because Sevatar did talk about defending humanity
Right.
and not liking the Imperium.
Right.
So there's a great impetus for him to fuck off to the outer rim of the galaxy and just patrol for aliens.
Right.
So between that and the chapter being described as looking similar to Night Lords, without that ever being explicitly stated, it gives me hope there.
In Red Tithe, if you haven't read it, is in my opinion excellent. Right, it is Night Lords versus Cacharodons on a prison world, effectively, fighting over kind of who gets to take the dregs, right, and introduce them into their legion. So there's a really interesting tension within the Night Lords, and you brought up this point about being them, not Imperium, being traitor, not chaos, right? So I want to read a passage, and I'm gonna skip a lot of spoilers. So this is Amon Cull saying, Amon Cull being the prime or the commander of a formation of Night Lords, saying it to a Chaos Sorcerer. I'd hoped you wouldn't lose yourself to the Daemon's will. I'd hoped you were still a true member of the Eighth, but you have expended your last chance. You had none of the Primarch's foresight. You only saw what Bargul allowed you to see. In your greed, you became its slave. You wanted to become a god, so you made yourself a monster. You served others when the Eighth Legion should only ever serve itself, and I will not allow a daemon to rule this warband through an old puppet like you. If you had completed the ritual with his blood, you would have made your daemon master too powerful. The long war is over for you, flayed father. This is from my real father, not the false one you skinned in his place, not the murdering one whose genes you implanted in me. This is for the Salvar dragon, the hive city you virus bombed. So that tension, sort of between evil and chaos, for lack of a kind of better way of putting
Right.
it, is also present a lot in the Night Lords trilogy. Nowhere better than Vandred, who is known as the Exalted in the trilogy. And Vandred effectively was the former commander of First Claw, which is one of the elite subformations of the Night Lords. And he had kind of allowed himself to be possessed by this demon called the Exalted. And then there's a kind of great tug of war over the first two novels. And Vandred finally wins because Vandred is a warrior, like a master of void warfare, right?
Yep.
And his death scene, in my opinion, is one of the absolute best. Him talking to Talos about how to get the Echo of Damnation, out from the trap of the Red Corsairs is just, in my opinion, some of the best prose in all of 40K. And Paz, like you, I'm not generally inclined towards Space Marines, right? Like, I think that they are probably one of the least interesting parts of the Imperial power structure.
Now, the Exalted, the demon that possesses Vandred, I want to say it was a demon of Tzeentch, but do any of you guys remember if that was ever even actually established or not?
It is not, I don't think.
Yeah, I think just by sheer description about it, like how he has, almost like a avian clawed feet that are warping his boots, and the different kind of avian aspects that we see typically with demons of Tzeentch, that it was pretty well identified that it was a Tzeentchian demon, but still.
Yeah, that's all I was getting at. I seem to remember those hints, but I didn't remember if it was ever explicitly stated.
Yeah.
And I think the Night Lords do a really beautiful job of illustrating that sort of struggle between being bound to chaos, slaves to chaos, as they were literally called in Warhammer Fantasy, and being mere renegades.
Right.
Because you see all these ultra-powerful members of the Night Lord's remnants either being possessed or consorting with the demons of the warp in some capacity. And it's clear that you can in fact draw power from those but you have the loathing of the actual Long War legionaries,
Right.
people who were there at Terra, remember the Daemon hordes and loathe them.
Right.
So it's this interesting struggle between, yes, you want the power, and these are clearly self-centered individuals,
Yeah.
but at the same time,
So let me read another passage here, and this I think shows you what's different about the Night Lords versus the kind of other Chaos Legions, the other enemies of the Imperium. Come about to these coordinates, stay out of the fight, keep the enemy at bay with lance strikes, and be ready to receive survivors. Do not engage. A pause. You will be remembered, Vandred. I would rather not be. He terminated the link with his bleeding claw and switched to the shipwide vox, wondering just how many people remained alive to hear it. This is the captain. Seek succor aboard the Echo of Damnation at once. All hands, abandoned ship. And it's really telling to me that, Vandred, despite in the worst of his possession, he's always got the bigger picture in mind, and he's always, maybe not necessarily trying to keep every individual alive, but he's trying to keep that collective alive. So there's this collective spirit that kind of pervades all of their actions. Vandred will take the crew talking back to him. There's one scene where an officer pushes back and says the ship won't do it. Vandred says, yes, it will. I'm in communication with its machine spirit. And then the guy doubts him again, so Vandred rips him in half. Right? But, again, he gave the guy every opportunity to back down, right? So that it's not a pure evil. It's an implementation kind of feature, right?
Yeah, I think that goes, that kind of tonnage we see a lot with different Night Lords, even with Malkarian, having some semblance of humanity even after 12,000 years of warp fuckery and that chaos taint that eventually starts to reach everybody.
Right. There's another Night Lord's character, Zosahal, in Steve Spurrier's, I think it's Lord of the Night, right? He kind of makes it his mission to not kill this one member of the Inquisitor's retinue because, they kind of have a sort of predator's respect for one another. He really goes out of his way to not kill her. And in the end, he saves her from the Inquisitor. Because he kind of senses that they're kindred spirits, right? Like that the renegade streak and her helping him fight against the chaos tainted Night Lords that Sahal inadvertently brings to the planet that he's looking, for a MacGuffin on. It's a really poignant scene to me in that, he recognizes that he messed up and that chaos is kind of worse than him and it's worse than the Imperium, right? So you can always kind of see in a lot of these Night Lord books, even when they're the primary antagonist, they kind of go out of their way to screw themselves by doing the right thing when the chips are down, and that makes them really interesting characters to me.
Yeah,
so here's where I'm going to completely derail everything. Sorry to cut you off, Davey, but Mike just triggered one of my various Warhammer autisms. We talk about a Night Lord saving an inquisitorial acolyte, and if you gentlemen have read the Beckwin books, the penultimate of Dan Abnett's Inquisitor stories, we see Gregor Eisenhorn working with an Alpha Legionary. So, gentlemen, I have to ask, what's with the Inquisition and Chaos Marines?
I mean, calling the Alpha Legion pure Chaos Marines, I think, is a complicated issue on its own.
Well, that's a spoiler, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, those certain radical sects of the Inquisition are always present throughout the lore, with like the Horicians, who believe that a being like Horus could be controlled and harnessed as this pure warp entity that the Imperium could use to its own. There's a few others too that are pretty radical that eventually do get hunted down throughout the lore. I'm not too familiar with the Beckwin trilogy. I've read the first book and then never really went further than that. It was kind of like the Ravenor trilogy for me, where it's like it was good, but everything else within that Eisenhorn universe, I kind of find it hard to really get myself into, other than that original trilogy of course, Xenos, Hereticus, and Malleus.
So I'm with you. I didn't terribly care for Ravenor, but it was nice setup by the time you get to Beckwin to know what had happened to those characters before they're reintroduced. And I really did love Eisenhorn too, of course. So I'm fully on board. I'm an Abnett fanboy, and I think his Inquisition writing is some of the best out there.
I think, it's just with the Night Lords being concerned of like them having any hand in an inquisitorial mission or something like that, any potential of them working directly with the Imperium is it's kind of against their whole ethos and why they rebelled in the first place, right? They feel like they've been shunned upon, and that really started with Konrad. When it started with him trying to warn Fulgrim of the heresy impending, everyone kind of said, "Fuck you, Konrad. We're not going to listen. You're insane." And continued to gaslight this broken dude until he finally snapped, and his legion, wanting to follow the steps of their gene father, was like, all right, well, fuck them then too, I guess.
And you know what? I think it's genuinely just a lore inconsistency. But it's amazing that everyone was kind of on board with Sanguinius's foresight bullshit, but not Conrad's.
Yeah, I think it was just because of the nature of who Konrad was. Here's this guy who's like, I'm going to go in and start doing these horrific things to a populace to get them under compliance. It just went against every other Primarch's DNA. But as the Emperor tells Konrad in his own novel right before he dies, is, hey man, like, I'm not pissed at you for doing Night Lord shit. Like, that's how I made you.
I created you to be my terror troopers. It's as simple as that.
Right, exactly. And the only thing the Emperor really could not forgive him for was his betrayal. But I think if Konrad might have gotten some support from the other Primarchs, things might have gone a little bit differently. But I mean, still, even the Terran-born Night Lords versus the Nostraman-born Night Lords, they kind of still share that same similarity.
Right, and they talk about it that even the Terran-born Night Lords were kind of from the prisons. I forget what the exact kind of lore reference is. So there was always that kind of thing. The famous quote is that all the other legions were warriors, we were murderers first. 8th Legion to our core. And while they are that, I think they say that, but if you look at how they treat their crew, they value their crew. How they treat their navigator, how Talos treats his slave Septimus, how even First Claw, as they're losing crew, you can see that they recognize that this is bad. It's not good for them to happen, that the crew has value, that, there is a value to humanity that they really never give up on, right? It may be twisted, it may be perverted, but they do have that dedication, right? That makes them a far more compelling antagonist, I think, than if they were just, the guys who like to wear filleted pelts, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're a perfect example of a good villain, right? They're evil. they're bad guys. Like, they are antagonists, but they have parts of their personality that you can understand. If not, like, it's kind of hard to identify with the Night Lord, but you can see where they're coming from at least.
Right. And you compare and contrast them with the Cacharodons, the way that they treat the crew on their flagship, and it's like, well, if any of us got the opportunity to pick, like, do you want the one where You have to avert your eyes, where they'll cut your head off and drink your blood. But those are actually the guys on the good team, right?
Exactly. I mean, God, how Blood Angels treated their crew, especially before Sanguinius showed up, like abhorrent. All the other legions hated them for it.
Yeah, well, they were still the Revenants before being reunited with Sanguinius.
Yeah.
They were basically treated as disposable, not because they weren't valuable warriors, but because they were so degenerate.
100%. 100%. Yeah, super, super interesting.
Now, one thing I do just want to reference, because I know somebody either in the comments or one of our friends is going to be like, "Oh, well, you guys only like the Night Lords because ADB is a Chaos fanboy with daddy issues." And
Davey and I might have talked about that during our Iron Warriors up too.
Yeah, we did.
But like at the end of the day, I think it works here, right? Because like they do have that background, they do have that tension, and it is kind of consistent with the lore, right? So, in as much as it might be misplaced elsewhere, I think here it is really, it is really cool, and it is really like there's payoff to that, right?
Yeah. And I just want to say that as much as we pan ADB, and I think we'll continue to do so, his prose, his actual writing, is genuinely top notch, and it's impossible. Well, I like to say he's got the single best line in all of 40K writing, just line by line.
Right.
In a sunless realm, the sun rose at last. For everything else wrong with that novel, how could you not get chills reading that scene time and time again?
I mean, he makes bolter porn good, right? Like he has a way of making action-packed books beautiful in their own sense, which I would never, knack ADB for. I think he has a way of making those stories not, just snooze fest.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think the Night Lords trilogy is if not one of the best Chaos Space Marine series of all time. For me, it's hard to find something that I would put above that. And that's a testament to how the Night Lords are written overall,
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, fellas, we got approximately 2.25 minutes left. So let's talk lightning fast aesthetics. How do we feel about the Night Lords' look, their fit, their drip?
I hate painting them. Those lightning bolts suck, dude.
I still haven't had the courage to try doing a lightning bolt on any of my Night Lords yet. Maybe I'll work up the courage eventually, but
I think the coolest thing, to connect the visuals to the lore about the Night Lords is the old Nostraman tradition of the red gauntlets, right?
Yeah, love that.
Which is to say that you've been marked for death, but you don't get to die yet. You still have a purpose, right? And that, I think, is really emblematic of kind of what they mean, how they operate, who they are. You can learn so much about them just by reading about that, right?
Yeah, and you know what? At the risk of being the edgy boy just once in my life, I love that their Heresy HQ units all have patches of flayed skin for you to paint on their armor.
I mean, it's badass.
Yeah.
Love them. I do think the wings, especially on some of the older models, get a little corny. They're a little large for their bodies. But I love the skulls. I love the flayed skin. I love the flesh. I mean, it brings in that idea of terror, right? That you don't even want the Night Lords showing up. If you hear that the Night Lords are coming, you want to give up, which is ultimately what they want.
Yeah.
I mean, I forget which Force Heresy novel it was, but like, I'm just gonna throw out a legion. Like it was like the Imperial Fist told, Planet, like, hey, we're calling the Night Lords unless y'all like chill the fuck out. I think that's so badass,
Okay, fellas. Closing comments before we sign off here. Lightning quick.
I think the Nostraman chain glaive is one of the more ridiculous weapons in a universe that is just riddled with ridiculous weapons. And I'll leave it there.
Konrad's vindicated.